My stepkids told me they only respect their real mom, and that they would make their dad divorce me, so I canceled all the benefits I was paying for and told their mom to pick them up, but she was on their side. My name is Rachel, I am 33 years old, and if you had asked me a year ago what my life looked like, I would have said something soft and hopeful, something about building a blended family that worked even when the world around us felt messy and unpredictable. I would have told you that Matt, my husband who is 36, had 2 kids from his previous marriage, Jake who is 14 and Lydia who is 12, and that they bounced between our home and their mothers in a rhythm that never made sense to anyone except Carly, their mom, who always had a reason she could not stick to any schedule. Sometimes she said she had a work emergency, sometimes it was a friend who needed her, sometimes she just went silent and dropped the kids off early or hours late, and Matt and I picked up the slack like it was normal. I did not fight it. I figured that stability mattered more than my frustration, and the kids needed someone who did not treat their day-to-day life like a game of hot potato. I paid for everything because someone had to. I covered Jake's phone plan, his endless school fees, the math tutor he needed because he kept switching houses and falling behind. Lydia wanted art lessons and a digital drawing app that cost more than it should have, but I paid for that too because she actually lit up when she talked about drawing. I handled the rides, the appointments, the nights when Carly disappeared and Matt tried to be diplomatic, saying she was overwhelmed or tired or dealing with something she did not want to share. I tried to convince myself that the kids would eventually see that I cared about them not because I had to but because I wanted to, that all the little things I did, the lunches, the reminders, the quiet pep talks right before tests, would eventually matter. The truth hit me in the most ordinary moment, a weeknight dinner where the kids were half engaged and Matt was trying to carry a conversation about school. Jake had his phone under the table, scrolling like he was allergic to eye contact. Lydia was picking at her food, waiting for him to dictate the mood because she always followed his lead. I was telling them about a new rule at the community center and how it might affect their weekend plans when Jake suddenly put his phone down and looked at me with this bored expression, the kind that made him look older than 14. He said that his mom told them they did not have to listen to me and that their dad would understand once they told him. He said it flat, like it was a fact, not something meant to hurt. Lydia nodded and added that they respected their real mom and that I should just relax while it lasts because their dad would not stay once they explained everything. There was no shouting. There was no dramatic crash, no storming out, no tears. Matt froze mid-chew, staring at his own kid like he had never seen him before. I felt something inside me just detach, not in anger at first but in absolute clarity, the kind that wraps around you like ice. I realized then that everything I had been doing was invisible to them because Carly had been working behind the scenes, feeding them little lines that turned me into the outsider, the placeholder, the wallet, someone they could use until it was convenient to push me out. I did not need to argue. I did not need to defend myself. The only thing that came out of my mouth was one sentence that surprised even me. I said that if they felt that way, then they would not need anything from me anymore. I cleaned up dinner like it was a normal night. I slept fine, which felt strange, like my body had already accepted something my mind was still catching up to. The next morning I woke up early, made coffee, sat at the table with my phone, and started shutting things down one by one. I canceled the rides that were linked to my card. I removed myself from the payment settings for their phones. I paused every subscription, every app, every class. I sent emails to tutors, instructors, coaches. I was embarrassingly polite in every message, thanking them for their time and explaining that the kids would not be continuing. Then I walked into the kitchen and saw Jake and Lydia sitting there, half annoyed and half confused that nothing was set up for them the way it usually was, and for the first time in a long time I did not feel guilty about it. I did not raise my voice. I did not try to explain consequences or give a speech about gratitude. I simply said that they should call their mother because the things I used to do were no longer my responsibility. I said it calmly, and even Matt did not know what to say because he understood exactly what I meant without me having to spell anything out. Then I texted Carly, "Come pick up your kids." Carly did not arrive the way a normal parent arrives to pick up their kids. She pulled into the driveway with that sharp, deliberate confidence she always used when she wanted everyone to know she believed she held the upper hand. The second her car door opened, Jake and Lydia bolted past me as if they had been held captive. They practically collided with her on the front steps, wrapping themselves around her in a way that looked exaggerated, almost theatrical. She hugged them with a triumphant smile, the kind of expression that made it clear she thought she had just won something. She flicked her eyes toward me for less than a second, just long enough to acknowledge my existence but not long enough to treat me like a human being. She said that they should get going, and the kids moved instantly, shoulders lifted, heads high, all proud energy and silent defiance. They walked toward her car in this synchronized motion that felt unnatural, like they had practiced it together somewhere else, in whispered conversations that were never meant for Matt or me to overhear. Matt attempted to say something gentle to them, something that might have cut through their sudden coldness, but they dismissed him so easily that the exchange barely registered before they were out the door. The moment the house closed behind them, everything fell flat. It was a level of quiet that did not feel peaceful. It felt like the kind that comes after someone has slammed a door on a conversation mid-sentence. There was no noise, no footsteps, no background tension from teenagers arguing about chores. The absence of all that sound felt heavier than the presence ever had. Matt kept pacing through the kitchen like he was expecting them to run back inside and say they forgot their backpacks or their shoes or something small that would force the world to return to its usual rhythm. But nothing happened. The house remained frozen in this odd stillness that made it difficult to breathe. It did not take long for the first hints of what Carly had orchestrated to show up. Within a few days, I heard from one of Lydia's teachers who casually mentioned that Lydia had been distracted in class because things were apparently complicated at home and she felt unwelcome in her father's house. The tone of the message was sympathetic toward her, which would have made sense if any of it had been true. Then Jake's coach reported that he had skipped practice, explaining that he did not want to go back to an environment where he felt unwanted. The words matched too closely, like they were reciting something they had been given. The phrasing had Carly's imprint all over it, that subtle twist she used whenever she wanted to turn herself into the savior and someone else into the villain. The more I heard, the clearer it became that she was shaping a version of events long before anyone else understood what was happening. She had dropped these little statements into their heads like tiny programmed lines, and the kids repeated them openly, without hesitation, fully believing they were true simply because she said them with conviction. Each call, each email, each offhand comment from another adult made the picture sharper. This was not impulsive behavior, it was a campaign. She was spreading her narrative anywhere it could stick, and the kids were embracing it with an eagerness that made it obvious they had been waiting for an excuse to take her side. It was unsettling to realize how quickly they adopted her language, how naturally they delivered sentences that did not belong to them, how committed they seemed to keeping the story going. She was planting seeds everywhere, and the kids were happily helping her water them. When the kids came back for their next rotation, the shift in their behavior was so clear it almost felt rehearsed. They walked through the door with the kind of composure you do not usually see in children, carrying themselves with a confidence that did not belong to them. They were not hurt or confused or even defensive. They looked calculated. It was the way Jake scanned the living room as if he expected something to be out of place, or the way Lydia immediately looked toward Matt as though she was gauging his mood. They hovered around the house with this odd, watchful energy, like two small spies returning from a meeting where someone had given them assignments. The complaints started within minutes. They criticized the food even though it was the same dinner they had eaten for years. They said the house felt too cold, then too warm, then somehow both. They rolled their eyes at the rules they had followed without question before. Every chore became an offense, every limit a personal insult. Jake lifted his voice whenever he talked about Carly, making sure Matt could hear him from the other room as he said that their mom let them eat whenever they wanted and did not control them. Lydia made sure to mention, with pointed casualness, that their mom missed the old days, before everything was ruined, before I became part of the picture. It was said with this airy, practiced innocence, the kind people use when they want their words to hit a target while pretending they did not aim them. They kept pushing in small ways, testing every boundary, making noise over every expectation. It felt less like normal teenage resistance and more like a coordinated effort to create tension. Every time I told them no or reminded them of something normal, like putting dishes away or finishing homework before screen time, they ran straight to their phones to call Carly. They made sure I saw them dialing, almost as though the act itself was meant to provoke. 10 minutes after each call, they returned with sharper edges, a more polished version of the same attitude, like someone had just stepped in to adjust their strategy. Their tones were more confident, their complaints more pointed, their attempts to irritate more deliberate. It was strange to watch children act with the precision of adults who wanted to provoke a reaction but had been coached to make it look like spontaneous frustration. Instead of engaging, I observed. I saw how quickly their energy changed whenever they checked their phones. I saw how their expressions tightened after they disappeared into their rooms to call her. I saw how they repeated the same lines in slightly different ways, always leaning in the same direction, always placing the blame neatly at my feet, always trying to pull Matt into an argument he did not start. There was something unsettling about how practiced it was, as though they had been given a list of triggers to test. It made the house feel like a stage where they were trying out scenes, waiting for a moment where one of us would slip and give them something dramatic to report back. Matt tried to keep the peace, but the effort exhausted him. Every time he attempted to have a normal conversation with them, they redirected it toward Carly, repeating stories about how much better things were at her place. They acted as though they were gathering evidence for some case they intended to present later. It was impossible to ignore how synchronized they were, how every comment, every complaint, every accusation connected perfectly to the next. It felt like a small but steady erosion, a series of taps against the same vulnerable points, as though the three of them had formed a team with a shared objective. I knew then that this was not just tension between households or normal blended family friction. This was coordinated. This was intentional. This was something built in the quiet moments between their rotations, something whispered to them when no one else could hear, something meant to destabilize us under the guise of childish frustration. And as I watched them move through the house with that strange new purpose, I felt the shape of what Carly had been building. All three of them, Carly and the kids, were moving in sync, pushing and testing us from the inside, trying to create cracks they could widen into a break. By the third rotation the pattern was so obvious it almost felt insulting that they still pretended it was natural. The energy they brought into the house was not the restless moodiness of kids caught between two homes. It was deliberate. It had an aim. They walked in with the same charged confidence they had the last time, but this time there was something even sharper in the way they carried themselves, like they had settled into the roles they were supposed to play and now they were ready to perform them without hesitation. They spent the first day bringing up pieces of Matt's life from before I existed, but not in the way children usually reminisce about old memories. They slid these comments into conversations like little weapons disguised as nostalgia. Every few hours they brought up something Matt supposedly did wrong before I came along, but the stories always had a clear twist to them. They hinted that their mom believed he had been happier when it was just the three of them, and they repeated it with the kind of confidence that told me they had been fed those words more than once. They said that their mom insisted I did not understand him the way she did, and they dropped the statement casually, as if they were simply delivering a piece of information they assumed everyone already knew. It was always said with the same tone, as if they had practiced not only what to say but how to say it, how to soften their voices just enough to make it sound like an innocent observation instead of a jab aimed directly into the center of our relationship. Their criticism increased tenfold. Suddenly everything in the house was wrong. The lighting was bad. The couch was uncomfortable. The food was off. The rules were unfair. The temperature was never right. They analyzed details most adults would never notice, as though they were searching for things to use against us. Any small difference of opinion between Matt and me was immediately seized upon. If we disagreed for even a second, whether it was about chores, plans, or something meaningless like what takeout to get, the kids exchanged quick glances that carried more meaning than any words. It looked like they were tallying points, like every disagreement counted towards some invisible score they were keeping. It was so synchronized that it was almost eerie, as if they had been coached to look for these moments and to treat them like victories. The nights were the worst. Carly called them every night without fail, always at the same time, always with the same urgency. The kids rushed to answer immediately, and they never stayed in the living room. They disappeared into the hallway or the far end of the kitchen, whispering into the phone with this hushed intensity that made it impossible not to notice. Their voices stayed low, but you could hear the patterns, the pauses where they waited for her guidance, the little hums of agreement, the occasional quick glances toward Matt or me before they turned away again. It was the behavior of people relaying information, not children chatting with a parent. After the calls, their attitudes always sharpened. They were more irritable, more reactive, more precise in their attempts to push us. They repeated new phrases, new criticisms, new observations that did not sound like them at all. It was as if they were receiving updates in real time, instructions on what to press next, which buttons to push, which angles to use. Nothing they did felt spontaneous anymore. Everything had intention behind it, even the smallest interactions. I kept watching from the background, trying to piece the pattern together. It was not just the comments or the whispering or the coordinated glances. It was the rhythm of it all, the timing of their shifts in attitude, the sudden alignment in their complaints, the way they seemed to operate as one unit instead of two separate kids reacting in their own ways. They were moving through the house with a purpose that did not belong to them. Their reactions felt too polished, too aligned with Carly's tone, too pointed to be accidental. I had nothing concrete. No messages, no recordings, no proof of coaching. But the longer I watched them move through each rotation with the same strategy, the more undeniable it felt. This was not confusion. This was not emotional struggle. This was execution. I had no proof yet, but it felt like Carly was calling all the shots, and the kids were following her playbook exactly. The breaking point did not arrive quietly, and it did not show up in some subtle shift that only made sense in hindsight. It came crashing down in the middle of an argument that was not even about anything meaningful. Jake had been pushing the entire afternoon, cycling through complaints, stirring tension with the confidence of someone convinced he could not lose. Lydia hovered close by, echoing every negative remark with her own smaller version of it. Matt tried to stay patient, but the pressure had been building for weeks, and there was no room left for tolerance. It escalated fast because that was the rhythm they had all fallen into. The kids provoked, Matt tried to redirect, and I stood in the middle trying to keep the entire situation from boiling over. It was Jake who finally slipped. He had been pacing back and forth like he was preparing for another rehearsed line, something crafted perfectly to hit the exact spot Carly wanted hit. But then he got frustrated. The words came out too fast, too loud, stripped of the control he had been practicing. He shouted that their mom said if the kids pushed hard enough, Matt would get tired of me and realize he had been happier before. The second the sentence hit the air, he froze. His whole face tightened like he knew he had crossed into territory he was never supposed to say out loud. Lydia went pale, almost shell-shocked, because the line had not been meant for public use. It had been meant for quiet halls, whispered calls, late-night coaching sessions where Carly could mold her narrative without consequences. Matt looked at Jake with this stunned expression, the kind a person gets when their entire understanding of a situation drops out from under them. It was not anger at first. It was devastation. The realization hit him in full force, and you could see the pieces fitting together in his head, every strange attitude change, every coordinated complaint, every attempt to provoke conflict. The truth assembled itself in front of him, and there was no way to ignore it anymore. In that one moment everything clicked into place. Carly had not simply been stirring trouble or trying to sway the children emotionally. She had built a small, loyal task force out of her own kids. She had fed them lines, given them objectives, and sent them into our home with a purpose. They had been carrying her instructions back and forth between houses like messages smuggled across enemy territory. Undermine Rachel. Exhaust Matt. Fracture their relationship with tiny cuts delivered over weeks. Push and push and push until something snapped. She had been selling them the vision of their old family, not the real one, the one she rewrote in her mind and then drilled into theirs until they believed it without question. Matt did not wait long before confronting her. He called her, and she picked up with the casual smugness of someone convinced she had done nothing wrong. When he laid out what Jake had said, she did not deny any of it. She leaned into the narrative she had been building, framing it as her helping the kids express what they wanted. She went on about how I had never fit into their world, how I disrupted a structure that had worked before, how Matt belonged with his real family. She said all the things she used to imply through the kids, now out loud, stripped of the cushion of indirect delivery. She revealed exactly how long she had been manipulating them, how confidently she had been directing every shift in their behavior, and how content she was to use them as tools in her own agenda. It was disturbing how easily she justified it. She spoke as though she was the only one advocating for the children, ignoring the fact that she had encouraged them to sabotage their own stability in the process. And for the first time, the kids heard the tone of her voice without the filter of their own loyalty, and they looked startled. It was as though they had not expected her to say these things with such blunt certainty. The realization that they were pieces in her game seemed to hit them late, but it hit hard. They had spent months being shaped into weapons without understanding the long-term impact. Now they were watching the damage unfold in real time, watching Matt crumble, watching me pull back, watching the entire structure of two households twist under the pressure of their mother's strategy. The kids watched both households collapse under the weight of their mother's manipulation, and for the first time, they seemed unsure whether they were winning or losing. After the truth came out, the entire atmosphere inside the house changed so quickly it felt like the walls were exhaling. The tension that had been building for weeks finally cracked open, and the kids, who had walked around with rehearsed confidence, seemed to deflate the moment the reality settled on them. They approached me without the attitude they had worn like armor, asking to speak privately, and for the first time in a long stretch of chaos, they looked like children rather than the miniature strategists their mother had shaped them into. Lydia was the first to speak, her voice unsteady as she admitted that their mom had told them their dad would remember how good things used to be once I got tired of them. She delivered the sentence with this conflicted look that made it clear she finally understood how hurtful the idea was. Jake followed her confession with an explanation that almost sounded like a plea. He said they believed they were helping their parents get back together, convinced that creating enough friction in our home would restore a version of life that Carly had painted as perfect. They genuinely believed they were fixing something, not breaking it. It was painful to hear, but the intent behind their actions finally made sense. They had been manipulated into believing they were part of some noble mission, guided by a parent who twisted nostalgia into instruction. They never questioned the strategy because they trusted the person who designed it. They were victims of her war long before they became participants in it, recruited into a conflict they did not understand. I told them calmly that I understood why they believed her, because children tend to follow whatever story promises familiarity and comfort, even if it requires hurting someone else. But I also told them that I would not be stepping back into the same role I had held before. I refused to carry a family that had spent months trying to push me out. If they wanted a relationship with me that was honest and healthy, they would have to rebuild trust from the ground up, without their mother's influence shaping every move, without secret missions or quiet sabotage cutting into the foundation. They nodded with a seriousness that had been missing for months, and in that moment, they looked like they were finally beginning to understand the wreckage they helped create. Matt, who had been rattled by what Jake revealed, transformed almost overnight. The shock hardened into something steadier and more committed. He stopped allowing Carly to treat the kids like pawns she could move between houses. He started enforcing boundaries that should have existed years ago, shutting down the late-night phone calls that fed the kids new scripts, refusing to let her rebuild the same destructive dynamic that had pushed his family to the breaking point. He took responsibility for the parts of the situation that he had let slide for too long, reclaiming the parental role instead of letting Carly direct every emotional shift from a distance. As for me, I did not react the way people thought I would. There was no shouting or gloating or triumphant declaration. There was no dramatic meltdown or revenge fueled by anger. My revenge was far simpler and far more effective. I stopped playing the game Carly had constructed. I stepped away from the battlefield she tried to build inside my home and refused to be the obstacle she wanted me to be. Once I withdrew from the script she had crafted, the entire structure fell apart. Without my involvement, there was nothing left for her to manipulate. Her tactics depended on my reaction, and when that reaction disappeared, the strategy collapsed under its own weight. The kids saw the collapse more clearly than anyone. They saw that their mother's plan had never been about their well-being or their happiness. It had been about her fixation on a version of the past she could not let go of. They saw how quickly everything crumbled once the truth came out, and they understood what it meant. And for the first time in a long time, I got to live in a house where the truth wasn't twisted.